Well, good morning. We'll go ahead and start getting started here. I know that it felt a bit rushed out there this morning. I couldn't believe how quickly lights were flickering, and I still hadn't gotten to the bathroom yet, and that was not good. So I finally got there, but it seemed to go awful quick this morning. Yeah. All right, so we're going to be in week 5 looking at King Saul this morning. And last week we started looking at the spiritual leadership, if we can consider that spiritual leadership of King Saul. And this week we're going to get into people of purity. So that's another piece that we can pull out of Numbers. So that's what we'll be looking at as we start this morning. The first couple weeks I had with being a leader of an army and looking at the beginnings of Saul's life, I didn't combine pieces together, but with the spiritual leadership and people of purity, some of the stuff that was left over from last week, I've melded into the lesson this week as they kind of go hand in hand with a couple different lessons. So that's what we'll see as we get going today and hit a couple of pieces that we didn't get to last week, and a couple parts we're going to go back and take a quick revisit as well, in considering the people and the leadership too. Let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for this time that we can gather this morning. Just thank you for Pastor Gary's message as he continues to take us through the book of Hebrews and brings better clarity to it in that way what we try to do on our own sometimes. And be with us now as we go through this Sunday school hour. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Huh. Usually I open this up about 7 or 8 minutes before we get started because this always happens. But it didn't get open that quickly, and while we're praying, by golly, popped away. I was getting a bit nervous at the end of Pastor Gary's lesson this morning. Not that I'm concerned about having a lack of rest because of where I am with my salvation, but whenever he brought that piece up with the Puritans and talking about parts bouncing off bald heads, then I started to get a little concerned. Did I miss that somewhere along the line? But I was reassured. So, and I know some of you felt the same. I'm not going to name any names.
Starts with a B.
What's that?
Starts with a B. Not going to mention any names.
Yeah. A B. He's not the only one.
You might lose part of your Sunday school class.
Here we go. I must have done something last week because I've lost some people too. My wife didn't even show up today. She's in the nursery. All right, so let's start this morning in Numbers. That's where we started at last week. And we see this 4 different parts of a spiritual calls that leaders are supposed to have. And one is with the purity of the people. So I want to take a look at that part this morning. It's in Numbers chapter 5, if you would go there. So last week we saw where it was leadership and the different rules they had within the context of the tabernacle. And we tried to take some of those tabernacle applications and put them into the leadership of the people during this time of King Saul. And so now we're taking a look at how there's watching over the people as well. So take a look at some of this with me. So then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the sons of Israel that they send away from the camp every leper and everyone having a discharge and everyone who is unclean because of a dead person. And you shall send away both male and female, and you shall send them outside the camp, so that they will not defile their camp where I dwell in their midst. And the sons of Israel did so, and sent them outside the camp, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. And thus the sons of Israel did. So we see some physical parts of what people are supposed to be doing during this time period, and making sure that they are not defiling in the camp, because God is in the camp. And so if God is in the camp, we can't let some of this uncleanness be there. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, and speak to the sons of Israel, when a man or woman commits any of the sins of mankind, acting unfaithfully against the Lord, and that person is guilty, then he shall confess his sins which he has committed, and he shall make restitution in full for his wrong, and add to a fifth of it, and give it to him for whom he has wronged. So now we're starting to get into some spiritual matters. So we saw the physical matters, and now we see the spiritual. And so it was up to Moses to be in charge of the people, that they were handling these things correctly. So this leadership that Moses had as in a spiritual manner, we can see how that was transferred to the judges, and now we're going to see, does it apply with kings, and are the kings applying it? And specifically here is Saul applying as he should, in watching over different pieces that could cause the people to be guilty of sin. Going to verse 8. So it said, but if man has no relative to whom restitution may be made for the wrong, the restitution which is made for the wrong must go to the Lord for the priest, besides the ram of atonement, by which atonement is made for him. Also, every contribution pertaining to all the holy gifts of the sons of Israel, which they offer to the priest, shall be his. So every man's holy gifts shall be his. Whatever any man gives to the priest, it becomes his. All right, so we see some rules in play of what the people are supposed to do, and what the leader is supposed to do in with the people. Yes? Are you with me? So they got that part, okay? Now we can continue and go through the rest of chapter 5, and we're going to see similar pieces with the different offerings that are handled. But with these offerings that are handled, it is supposed to be the priest who handles these offerings. If you would, take a look down at verse 16 real quick. And it tells us in verse 16, and then the priest shall bring her. And then if you take a look at verse 17, it says, and the priest. And verse 18, the priest. And verse 19, the priest. Verse 23, the priest. Verse 25, the priest. So the people who are supposed to take care of many of these parts deal with the priest. Yes? So when we see this, as we go through with the purity of the people, you have a leader who's in charge of making sure things are done, but there are certain roles that the priest should have as well, in making sure that sacrifices and such are being taken care of. And so when we get into the life of Saul, he had a certain role that he needed to take care of, but we're going to see where sometimes he tried to take on the role of the priest, and that would be troublesome for him. All right, so let's continue looking at this idea of purity with Saul as a leader, and go over to 1 Samuel now, now that we get a bit of a background in Numbers. Any thoughts or comments that you wanted to bring out with some of those roles in chapter 5? Okay, so let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 7 then. Now, this is a passage we've looked at before, but we're looking at this in regards to Samuel. And the difference that we see with Samuel compared to Saul is that Samuel was a judge, but he was also a priest. And when we come to Saul, Saul's a leader, but we don't ever see where Saul is giving the rights of the priest. So whenever Samuel led, in verse 6, it said they gathered Mizpah, and he drew water and poured it out before the Lord, and he fasted on it that day, and he said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the sons of Israel at Mizpah. Now, when the Philistines heard that the sons of Israel had gathered to Mizpah, The lords of the Philistines went up against Israel, and when the sons of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the sons of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hands of the Philistines." So Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it for a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. Now Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, and the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day against the Philistines and confused them, so that they were routed before Israel. So here's Samuel offering up the offerings. But again, he is a priest, so he's able to do that. And the men of Israel went out to Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them down as far as below Bethkar. And then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shen and named it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." And so the Philistines were subdued and did not come any more within the border of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. All right. And we see the same part with 14 and 15. It says, "Now Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life." So he was a judge. He was a person who was in charge of some of the purity with the people here. All right. So we see where things stand with Samuel. So let's go over now to 1 Samuel chapter 11. And in 1 Samuel 11, we see that Saul has been named as the king. And there's a battle that has taken place in chapter 11. And if we go down to take a look at 11 through 14, we see Saul in action as a leader here. And take a look at what it says. It says, "The next morning, Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp at the morning watch and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. And then the people said to Samuel, 'Who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in, that we may put them to death.' But Saul said, 'Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished deliverance in Israel.' And then Samuel said to the people, 'Come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there.' So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And then they also offered sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly." So here is, in verse 13, they're asking, well, hey, Saul, who should we put to death? These people were opposing you as king, and should we get rid of them? And so here is Saul, and he needs to make a moral judgment on what will happen with these people. And he makes the decision to do what? What does he say? Don't kill them. Let them go. Let them go. Spiritually, this sounds like a great decision. I'd say it is, because if you decide to say, well, we're going to kill all those people, well, what happens with others whenever they see that? Maybe they don't want to follow or get in line, or they decide, well, I'm going to be the next person to attack. But whenever he says, no, we're going to let people go, he makes a great decision, it seems like, for people to say, hey, fall in line, you're going to be all right. So at least to me, it looks like it's a great decision. And we can see a decision as a leader, things that are going to be good for his country, but there's a spiritual piece, I believe, that goes with that as well. So Saul is making a sound judgment right here. Go back to verse 6, though, and take a look at it. And notice how Saul is working. The Spirit of God had come upon Saul mightily when he heard these words, and he became very angry. So we know the Spirit of God was on Saul throughout that battle. And I'm going to assume that the Spirit of God was still upon Saul as he made this sound judgment. And so it's a whole lot easier to have that wisdom whenever you have the Spirit of God that is upon you. Thoughts with that?
Well, we as
Yes.
or even more than us.
Yes. And should be able to make sound judgments with that if we're going to God's presence. Darren and then Dan.
That's just a great counselor, the Holy Spirit is
Mhm.
to us, and so his counseling Saul here is to show mercy where he could.
Yes. Dan?
Yeah, we do, even though we do have the Spirit all the time, though, we are commanded to walk in the Spirit, not in the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I have the Spirit, there are times that I make decisions that are completely guided by myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not availing myself to that benefit.
Yep. Oh, Darren?
And I think it was good though that Saul, acknowledged the Lord. The Lord has accomplished deliverance in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And, acknowledging it wasn't of him and his necessary direct leadership, but it was God working through him and the people of Israel and their obedience to God and the Spirit of God
Okay.
making them victory.
Yes.
Just some quick clarification. The people that they were wanting to put to death, that was the people of Israel, correct? Like some of the tribes that were rejecting.
Yes.
So that would have been within the kingdom of killing his own people, we're not talking about.
Yeah, we're not talking about people from foreign nations, right? It's his own people. So here he had killed people from other lands, and now he showed his authority. And after showing his authority, he goes back and says, "Hey, should we show other people in Israel that you're really king? You don't get rid of them?" And he says no. So,
Notice the dread of the Lord came upon the people because there was a severe punishment in verse 7. That they say, he took a yoke of oxen, cut them in pieces, sent them through all the territory of Israel, but the messenger saying, whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall be done to his oxen. That would definitely put dread in the minds of the people.
yeah, yeah. So it could have been to say, "You will be gone," but here he says, "No, we'll let the people be." Yep. So this reminds me with Lincoln, in that he had chosen to allow the Southerners that they would, if they would come back to the Union, that they would be allowed their freedom. And so I was really trying to find a correlation where maybe Lincoln had gotten this because of what he saw happen with, hopefully something with Saul or with Solomon, but I couldn't find it anywhere. But I would have to assume that he had gotten his wisdom from somewhere and maybe reading through one of these different pieces. Now, whenever I had, I knew that Lincoln had talked about leaving the people free, but I was surprised on the date that it happened. It happened on December 8th, 1863, whenever he put this amnesty piece into place. So that's 2 years, well, a year and a half before the war was over, to start saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna let you know right now. Come on back. So I always found that very interesting to happen with Lincoln. But we can see, I just wanted to be able to show where we can see some of what Saul was given the opportunity to do. That pieces like that have happened since then as well. All right, let's continue then. So let's go to chapter 13. Yeah. Yeah. So in chapter 13, we see that there's battle with the Philistines now, and Saul is supposed to be patient, and Saul is impatient. So again, he has the kingship, but he is not considered a priest, and because he's not a priest, their activities he cannot be involved in. So if we take a look here in chapter 6, now Saul was supposed to wait for 7 days, and in the 7 days Samuel was going to show up, but Saul couldn't wait. Let's see. Let's go ahead and start with verse 4. And it said, "All Israel heard the news that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel had become odious to the Philistines. And the people were then summoned to Saul at Gilgal. Now the Philistines assembled to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen. and people like the sand which is on the seashore in abundance. And they came up and camped in Michmash, east of Bethaven. And when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves and in thickets and in cliffs and in cellars and in pits. Also, some of the Hebrews crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Now, he waited 7 days according to the appointed time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and all the people were scattering from him. What's Samuel or what's Saul afraid of right here?
Losing his army?
Losing his army. Yeah. So Saul said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And he offered the burnt offering. He's not a priest. And as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and to greet him. Now that surprises me. Because if I knew that I had done something that I wasn't supposed to do, acting as a priest, I don't know that I would go out there.
He was pretty arrogant,
Yeah, so,
just like, well, look at me, I went ahead and did it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm king, so,
which almost seems like he felt like he had the authority
yes.
to do it.
Does Saul realize the full implications of what he had done at this point about Samuel?
Has he done what now?
All implications of what he had done at this point. Did he
Yeah.
fully recognize that? Maybe not. That's why he went out to Samuel. He didn't realize the full force of what he had done
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah,
I could almost imagine hearing him say to Samuel, "Oh, it's all good, I took care of it."
uh-huh. Let's see what happens.
Right, yeah, I was gonna say, that's why he was sort of arrogant and, I don't know, you sort of know people like that, they just get into their own head and they think, well, here I am king and my army's leaving me and you didn't show up, so,
I'll just take care of it.
yeah, I'll just go ahead and take care of it,
Mhm.
I'm the big shot here.
Can't wait for Samuel.
Not my
He's
fault.
late.
Not
Yep.
my fault.
Well, let's continue. Verse 11. But Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, so here it seems like he does know. He said, "Because I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the appointed days, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash." Was he there on the seventh day?
Yes.
He was still there on the seventh day, just not at the time of day that Saul wanted him to be there on the seventh day. "And therefore I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not asked the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering."
Oh, he forced himself, huh?
Samuel said to Saul, "You've acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." So, the command was what?
Just to wait for me.
Wait for whom?
The priest.
The priest. Wait for the priest. But he doesn't wait for the priest. He acts on his own. So we certainly have certain rules that are in play. Now, before, whenever we saw that, if we go back a couple chapters and we saw where Saul had done wrong, he had said, "I know that I have sinned, and I've acted inappropriately. I've done the wrong thing." But if you take a look at the rest of the chapter, 15 through 23, I don't see it.
Well,
Yes.
I read in verse 11, saying it says, "Well, what have you done?" Well, then Saul comes back and is like, "Well, you didn't." He changes the blame to others, things, circumstances, and not to himself.
Right.
Any kind of apology for, yeah, I did wrong. He didn't give any sense of that.
Yep. Yep.
Kind of reminds me of Adam when he said,
Yeah.
"The woman you gave me."
I was just gonna say, say that.
Kinda saying, well, it's kinda your fault.
Right. Brian?
The only thing it says that Saul did really was count his men, so he's still a little preoccupied with the situation and not fully grasping, I think,
Yeah.
what he did.
Yeah. He's still thinking about the people instead of what's going on with God. Yep.
But he's sort of saying, what choice did I have? I had to do this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't have to, he could have waited, you know, but he impulsively acted on it.
He did trust
Not of
you.
faith, he didn't act out of faith, he
Right.
acted of what he thought was necessary.
If he trusted God, he would have waited, knowing that.
So here we see this piece where he did not trust God, he did not wait for the priest. But then if we go over to 1 Samuel 17, verse 37, just one little verse. And I think I'm guilty of skipping over this sometimes because I get so enraptured of the story with David that I forget about Saul. And this is a piece that I find this verse interesting based on what we've seen with Saul so far. And so David is going out to battle the giant. And in verse 37, it says, and David said, 17:37, David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, and he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine." Very confident in who his God is right there. And then Saul says, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." And it seems here that he recognized the true power of God and that God can rescue him from Goliath. So what do we do with this? Here's this guy, he offering sacrifice when he's not supposed to, and it doesn't look like he's, asked for forgiveness on this, but yet he still knows who God is and the power of God.
I think, just anxiety of the fact of what the situation was, and was the fear that he was gonna lose his army because they were impatient. He became impatient, as we do, because and not relying on the faith of God. God was gonna do what he said he was gonna do, and not, we have a different time.
But he's
We have
patient.
things that happen,
Yeah.
and we sometimes, and I've been guilty of that, is just not being patient. So we do things to push things along.
Sure.
That we think is in line with, hey, God, you're gonna, start things sooner here.
Yeah.
Action, and not relying on God and having faith in God and his time frame.
Right. So I'm just going to push this a little bit. So do you think that Saul rather, has learned to be patient now whenever it comes to Goliath because he didn't rush out to the battlefield? Or do you think that might have been fear?
Lack of faith.
Lack of faith?
Somebody stepping up to the plate.
Uh-huh. Bob?
Now, when Goliath had been coming out daily and threatening, asking for a representative from Israel, and so Saul's sitting there and none of his men are coming forward to want to go do this champion. And also he was so concerned earlier about his men leaving, so I think he was probably in the thinking of, well, I don't wanna push it, but we'll just wait as long as we can. And then when David comes up and volunteers, and I always thought it was kind of funny too that Saul wanted David to wear his armor. And of course, David tried,
You're right.
and so, but he gave it up, and then Saul, I think this is when Saul began to think, well, the Lord has deserted me
Right.
for some time here, and now maybe he sent this representative.
So I'd never considered this until you mentioned it. So do you think if David would have worn Saul's armor, do you think he was trying to disguise?
No,
In
I
essence.
think David would have felt like he wasn't dependent on the Lord.
Yeah, no, but I'm like looking at the perspective of Saul. That Saul's saying, man, if I can trick somebody to wear my armor, maybe the people think it's me out there on the battlefield. He's played that disguise game before. It just with the way you phrased it, it just made me wonder about that. Dan and then Jared.
It's just amazing all through this that Saul's response is always, these are my enemies, prophecies or my victory, whatever. His focus is so much on himself. And his son Jonathan and David both would say, these are enemies of the Lord.
Yeah.
The Lord's the one that gives victory. And
Right.
so Saul's selfishness and ego is always seen in all of it.
But and I agree. I agree. So when you look at that part where he says, "Go and may the Lord be with you," should we look at that as a throwaway line, or is there honesty in that? Because I agree with you on. He seemed like he's doing that for himself, but here, is it for himself, or is there a bigger picture that he maybe sees? I don't have a good answer.
I think it's a throwaway line.
Think so?
Yeah, there's, because it has nothing else in front of it.
Yeah.
As, I know some of my friends that aren't Christians necessarily, that, they won't say Jesus. This is, but they'll say to you, well, they'll use it as a reference, so God will go with you, or peace, or so, I mean, they'll say some interjection to some religious thing or something.
Right.
And, it's just as they say, it's just a throwaway line, or I'll pray for you. Well, no, it's just a throwaway line.
Or
So that's what
God
I think
bless.
Yeah, right, or God bless, yeah, really, yeah. So I mean, it's just, as they say, it's just a throwaway line. I
All
don't
right.
think he really is.
Jared, and then Sarah, and then up the front.
I think I don't think it's necessarily a throwaway line, just because I think we're forgetful people. And even Saul, in this moment, like this whole time Goliath is challenging them, and he's looking at it in a worldly way, like, okay, what man do I have who can physically take this guy? I don't see anybody here. And he's looking at it from a worldly stance, whereas David comes along with the Spirit of God and was like, no, the Lord is the winner of this battle, and my faith is in him. And then Saul's like, oh yeah, you're right, yeah, may the Lord be with you. Because we see this in Saul's life at different points, like when David cuts off the thing from his cloak, and then Saul's like, you're a more righteous man than I. You could have killed me and you didn't. Like, you see these moments in Saul where he's like, oh.
He's brought back to it.
Right. So, and I think that's how we all are too. I mean, we're very forgetful people too.
Sure.
And we need that constant reminder, like in every situation, to go back to our faith in the Lord and trust in Him.
Sure. Sarah?
Yeah, kind of just similar, I guess. I do feel like, there's different times where I feel like he sees, the light shine from David. He knows that he just got anointed, doesn't he? So, I mean, I think he sees David and he sees that he has this favor, and I think that he does see his light shine bright, and he sees just the peace that he has with that. I mean, even moving forward to, David playing music for him, and seeing, that there's something that shines from him that, even brings Saul peace.
Sure.
So I don't know, I don't really see it as a throwaway line either, because, we all struggle and we all have these different things too.
Right.
I think I can relate.
I think God only knows, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard for us. It depends on sometimes how we bring our thoughts at that time, because sometimes I do look and say throwaway line, but there's other times it's like, maybe there's something there. Yeah. Yes. I got you, Brian.
Notice how Saul reacts when he knows David's going to go. He says, here's my armor, you need this.
Yeah.
So it was a sort of reliance upon armor, Saul saying, you go against Goliath. But what does David say? He says, I don't need these. So David, you show where David's reliance. He proved it because he didn't even put any armor about to meet this Goliath who was 9 feet tall,
Right.
a warrior. But Saul thinks he'll need these armors. David says, I don't need these. He goes out with a slingshot.
Right.
So you see the man of faith is David, not Saul.
And we're going to see David more next year
Yeah.
as we look at it again. Yeah.
I saw this as a throwaway line because I was under the impression that Saul just wasn't all there during this time, because beforehand, he goes to Jesse and asks for permission to have David play music for him, and then David and Goliath have their encounter, and then Saul says, who is this person? And forgets who his father even is. Who's this person's father? It's odd that we go from him meeting the dad and talking to him about having David there to, who is this person again?
Right.
So,
You know, though,
Yes.
Before we had just mentioned that the Spirit of the Lord fell upon Saul or whatever, and maybe he, just like, as a Christian, you can recognize that in another person when someone is Spirit filled and, walking with the Lord. It's, for me, when I see that, it's convicting. And,
Sure.
And I hate use the word feel, but sense or whatever, that, man, that person is really walking with the Lord. And Saul knew this, that he could recognize that in David. He's like, yeah, there's something about this guy that's special, or
Right.
something that's happening to him that is special. And that's how I look at that. It's like,
Sure.
there's something going on with him.
Yep. Somebody else over here was. Okay. Well, let's move on to our next part. And if you go over to chapter 19 now, and we looked at this a little bit last time, because I had it out of place. But I want to take a look real quick. So here is David being pursued by Saul, and there's a piece that we come where that pursuit is taking place, and it tells us Saul is wanting to capture David, and people are continually saying, well, they don't know where he is, or they're hiding him and stuff. And so in verse 18, it tells us, now David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and stayed in Naoth. And it was told Saul, behold, David is at Naoth in Ramah. And then Saul sent messengers to take David. But when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying with Samuel, staying and presided over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. And it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. So we got all these people prophesying. So Saul sent messengers again, and the third time, they also prophesied. And then he himself went to Ramah and came as far as the large well that is in Secur, and he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And someone said, behold, they're at Naoth and Ramah. And so he went there to Naoth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him, so that he went along prophesying continually until he came to Naoth and Ramah. And he also stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel. And he lay down naked all that day and all that night. And therefore, they say, is Saul also among the prophets? So here's this, piece where Saul is prophesying now. And, just the context of here we saw that he had this great sin, and then he says, go be with God. And now he's prophesying. And it tells us it came from God with a prophesying that took place right there. Yes.
Reminds me of first part of 2 Kings where Elijah was up on the hill and the king's men came to get him. And he says, man of God, come down from the mountain. He says, if I'm the man of God, may fire come out and consume you. And he got burnt and happened 3 times. And then God said, don't be afraid of coming down there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the third, and it happened 3 times that they, so it's almost like that when they're sent away prophesying and just didn't get burnt by fire like they did.
Yeah.
2 Kings.
All right. And I don't have a great answer for it. I was trying to look for it, but whenever I went and looked and trying to find out why was he prophesying, there were not any clear answers that I could find why he was prophesying right here. The stuff that I found most is that they talked about verse 24 of him stripping off his clothes. And I mentioned this last week, where there's some symbolism, some metaphor, I guess, going into that, where it's showing him removing his priestly garments. So probably not stripped all the way naked, but removing his priestly garments and showing that he is even losing more of who he was as a king, and losing that power that he had on the throne. So.
What does it mean to be prophesied?
That's where I could not get anything that was clear on what they meant by prophesying. Did they mean that God was speaking to them and they were bringing out to other people? I just couldn't find anything clear with this particular piece of prophesying, like we could in some earlier pieces where the prophesying was taking place.
Some kind of demonstration of people's recognize
Yes,
It doesn't really say what.
right, because they were within the area of Samuel whenever it was going on. These people would come within area of Samuel and they start prophesying. But I couldn't find anything that says definitively what the prophesying was about. But there's something with God going on right there. Yes.
The Hebrew word, I just looked real quick in Strong's, has the idea of being under the influence of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're speaking under the influence of God, it would seem almost what we would see in some ways in the charismatic movements.
Yeah.
I mean, they were out of control.
Mm-hmm. And so, and part of that, with being under the influence of God, is they said, well, God put him into a place to remove his clothes to show, well, I know I'm no longer going to be the king, and the end is coming soon.
Well, people actually question Saul, or is Saul too? Is Saul also among the prophets? They're wondering,
Right.
why is he Saul prophesying? Is he a prophet?
Mm-hmm. And with that phrase where it's used a number of times, where we see it here and where we saw it before, some people believe that was a mocking type of thing that was going on. Is he really among the prophets? Because there doesn't seem to be anything to show that he was ever a prophet.
I was thinking about Jesus being prophet, priest, and king. He's gonna actually be prophet, priest, and king.
Mm-hmm.
Where Saul tried to be priest and king, and he wound up prophesying.
Yep.
But for some reason, God used it to slow Saul down and trying to destroy David. He all of a sudden his whole demeanor just changed.
Meaning,
He's no longer after David no more.
sure.
So God used it for something.
Yes.
It's hard to understand.
Mm-hmm.
To change his heart and mind at that particular time.
Right.
The way I interpret the events, Saul is trying to get at David, and he sends men several times, and each time they are, to quote, we're taken under the influence of God, in other words, stopped.
Right.
And then even when Saul himself went, God did the same thing to him.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, he was showing everyone God was, his power. And the stripping of Saul was basically laying him bare in front of everybody,
Mm-hmm.
showing them that God is sovereign over everyone.
Yeah, the message was never given to where David was. Yeah.
Brian, I think the whole thing is kind of crazy because you got these messengers coming and they're overtaken by the Spirit.
Mhm.
More messengers and who are these people?
Mhm.
And did they even know God's word? And all of a sudden they're prophesying.
Mhm.
So I don't see Saul as standing out by himself. I see a whole bunch of people here doing stuff that's foreign to me.
Yeah.
So I probably am mocking them.
Uh-huh.
But, it's happening to all of them.
Right.
So why not me? How come I'm not doing it?
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole thing is kind of weird.
Yeah, it's a confusing piece right there for sure.
For Saul isn't finished with David, he's still go on pursuing him.
Yes.
Still, yeah.
Yep. And we're going to see more of that next week because we're out of time for today. So, thank you for your time this morning.